When Big Ben strikes midnight in London, it's more than a clock. For a century, its New Year bongs have been broadcast to the nation. An annual ritual that makes time feel shared even when everything else doesn't. Now rewind to 1970s Britain, an era that still feels close enough to touch. Colour TV becoming normal, cheap package holidays starting to tempt people abroad, pop culture exploding, but also an economy buckling under shocks, strikes and prices that wouldn't sit still. By 1971, the number of unemployed had risen to over 1 million for the first time since 1939, a statistic that landed like a cold splash of reality. So what did New Year's Eve mean in that decade? It meant promise, because it always does. But in the 1970s, hope had to fight for space. A major detail most people forget: in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, New Year's Day became a proclaimed bank holiday in 1974. That's not ancient tradition, it's relatively recent, so for a lot of families, the early 1970s still carried this odd feeling. Celebrating late, then waking up and going to work as if nothing special happened. That small, quiet shift in 1974 mattered. It made the new year feel officially real on the calendar, not just in your head. But 1974 also delivered one of the most dramatic New Year transitions of the entire decade. As Britain moved from 1973 into 1974, the country entered the 3-day week, a set of emergency restrictions designed to conserve electricity during a major energy crisis tied to industrial action and coal supply problems. Government statements in Parliament at the time described the measures, including the 3-day week, as forced by the need to avoid a breakdown in electricity supplies, linked to a sharp fall in coal production during the miners' action that began in November 1973. And here's the part that sounds almost unreal today. Television schedules were cut back, and there was a 10:30 p.m., close down in that period. An early enforced good night that made evenings feel shorter, smaller. So imagine that new year. Not as a movie scene, just as a fact of timing. A new year arriving under power restrictions, while the country argued over who was really in control, and then the numbers began to bite. Inflation in the mid-1970s wasn't an abstract headline. The official long-run retail prices index annual change hit 16.0% in 1974 and 24.2% in 1975. The kind of surge that turns everyday shopping into a weekly shock. At the same time, global pressures were hammering the system. Between 1972 and 1974, oil prices rose fourfold, and the cost of industrial materials and metals nearly doubled, exactly the sort of external squeeze that makes a country feel like it's paying for problems it didn't personally choose. So New Year's Eve in the mid-70s carried a particular tension. Celebration on one side of midnight, and on the other side, bills, prices, and pay packets that didn't stretch like they used to. By the middle of the decade, the crisis was so severe that Britain turned to the IMF. The pound, under pressure, had fallen from around $2.40 earlier in the decade to around $2 by early 1976, and roughly $1.65 by autumn. Symbolic, visible decline that people felt as national confidence draining away. And yet, this is what makes the decade emotionally complicated. Life didn't stop. People still went out, still danced, still tried to make the room feel warm, even when the country felt cold. New Year's Eve kept happening year after year, because tradition can be stubborn in the best way. There's a reason Big Ben matters here, even if you weren't in London, even if you didn't care about politics. That countdown broadcast tied the whole country to one moment, the same 12 strikes, the same crossing into the unknown. But as the 1970s moved toward the end, the mood shifted again, into something sharper. Late 1978 into early 1979 brought the winter of discontent, when widespread public sector strikes hit daily life hard. Accounts from the period describe rubbish left uncollected, reduced hospital services, and major disruption that became iconic in how people remember the era. So picture New Year's Eve approaching in that atmosphere, not as fiction, but as context. A country trying to toast the future while the present looked visibly messy and uncertain. And then 1979 arrived, and Britain didn't just change the calendar, it changed direction. The decade closed with politics and economics heading into a new era, with arguments about unions, inflation, and national decline turning into a powerful force that reshaped elections and policy choices. That's why New Year's Eve in 1970s, Britain hits hard. Because it wasn't one single night. It was a decade of countdowns, each one asking the same question in a different way. Will next year finally be easier? Sometimes the answer was no. The inflation numbers didn't care about optimism. The strikes didn't pause for fireworks. The energy crisis didn't respect tradition. But the bongs still rang out. People still raised glasses. And the year still turned. Because that's what time does, even when you feel stuck. So if you've ever felt like you're celebrating while carrying something heavy, welcome to the emotional truth of the 1970s. The decade didn't just test Britain's economy, it tested Britain's nerve. And yet, every new year, the country still gathered around the same sound, 12 strikes of a bell, trying again to believe in next year. If you want more true history like this, told through the moments people actually lived, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which decade do you think was harder, 1970s Britain or today?